Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning into today's live streaming. I appreciate you all, guys, whether you're watching us on YouTube, on Rumble, and on X. Today, I have a special guest, Dr. Tuomas Malinen. He's an associate professor of economics, the CEO of GNS Economics, and expert on geopolitics. Dr. Tuomas, thank you so much for being with me today. It's a really pleasure to have you on my channel for the first time. I just met you on X and I was excited to have you.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
The pleasure is mine. Your anti-war posts on X caught my attention, actually. And when I checked your profile and I realized that you are from Helsinki, I was like, a sane voice from Finland. I totally love that. What happened to the political class in Finland and the Baltic countries in general, where the drums of war are very loud nowadays?
Yeah, it's a really strange thing to watch what has happened here. Like I have a long history. Both of our families are actually from the east side of Finland, so I've been close to Russia basically all my life. And my mom is actually a retired lecturer of history and the society. So history and all these things have been very close to me basically all my life. And when I look back, like I'm 47 now, when I look back, like let's say 20 years even, there is still like a certain understanding of Finland as a source of neutrality in Europe and thus in the world. We had a very clear idea what Finland should be about. And this basically came from the 1944 when we lost our last war to Russia, but why we lost 12% of our landmass. And after that, they envisaged, Presidents Paasikivi and Kekkonen envisaged the Paasikivi-Kekkonen doctrine, which was basically based on mutual beneficial business-related coexistence with Russia, while we made ourselves very strong militarily, but we did not make ourselves a threat, and that was important for Russia because Russia has this concept of pesopatsnos. I'm not very fluent in Russian, yes. But anyway, the idea of the absence of threat. And like Finland was a beacon of it, supporting the kind of strategic neutrality in the whole Europe. And then suddenly it started to go away in the early 2000s, basically. And for some reason there was a push kind of under the current, under the surface, that we were kind of step by step, we were hurtled towards the NATO membership, and then it suddenly came after the onset of the Russia-Ukrainian war, or it's the more like the second stage, we may say, in 2022. So I don't know what has happened, but it has been a kind of slow progress and then a very rapid escalation at the end. And well, all the statements, like from our Minister of Defense, that Russia is a threat to the whole democratic world, are completely unheard of. That's basically the closest thing you can get from a declaration of war from Finnish ministers without actually declaring it. And of course, if we look at the other side of the Baltic Sea to Estonia, like the statements Kaja Kallas, their minister has been making, they have been an utterly insane things. Like you would never ever make such arguments unless the war is the aim. And that's the truly worrying thing here, that actually war could be the aim here.
When I read and listen to Kaja Kallas, for example, I truly ask myself this question: if she knows the meaning behind her words, because when she is speaking, I truly want to know if her advisors are telling her what to say, or at the moment she's excited and acting upon her senses, and she's saying things like, dividing Russia into smaller states, it's not like a really bad news. It's already very big, so it can be smaller parts. And I'm like, she's giving a service to Russia by saying this, because Russia says that the expansion of NATO to Ukraine aims at Americans having the capacity to project their power inside of the Russian Federation, destabilize our federation, and push for balkanization. And what she's saying, basically, she's proving the point of the Russians. So I ask myself this question: is this a sheer incompetence, or she is really provoking Russia in this case? And I don't find the answer, because we have also a foreign minister here in Germany, Annalena Baerbock. She's making similar statements. We are at war with Russia, and I'm going to support the Ukrainians as long as it takes, regardless of what my voters think, although their pollings are, their popularity has diminished immensely. The people are asking the question, why? Why should we go into war with Russia? And all these drums of war have been becoming louder and louder among the European political class. You mentioned at the beginning of 2000s, the tone started to change in Finland. And this is also probably attributed to the neocons coming more and more to power in the United States and trying to persuade the Europeans to join this wagon of hawkish and militaristic approach towards Russia. But 30 years of an American effort to weaken Russia and recent escalations in Ukraine proxy wars show a very dangerous trajectory that is getting far too little attention. How close do you think are we to the edge of no return between these both sides, NATO and Russia?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. The funny thing is that, well, I don't know if it's funny, but Finland was ascended as a full member of NATO on the 9th of April. Past year. NATO, the first treaty of NATO was signed 9th of April 1949. I don't think this was a coincidence. So it kind of, I was thinking that, that somebody wants to send a message through this. And well, you said basically that, well, that 30 years of kind of degradation of Russia or something like that. I have been a bit worried about Russian strength or building strength, especially the military strength of at least from early 2000s. I was like, okay, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the Russian military it went in a really bad place, basically. And I remember as a teenager, there was a lot of worry that what will happen to the massive nuclear arsenal. Will there be like some rebellious fractions getting their hands on them and launching them, and all this discussion. So it went, the Russian military, it just nosedived and went in a really dark place. But then they started, when President Putin rose to power, they really started to build the military up again. And I was like, yeah, and I was thinking that, okay, shouldn't this be something that we should be worried about concerning everything that has happened with Russia? But the European leaders were that, no, we don't need militaries anymore, basically. I was like, what is this? And Russia actually, Russia was, or there was this, let's call it the Eurasian alliance between Europe, China, and Russia forming. So Russia gained a lot from providing raw energy to mostly to Europe and China and elsewhere too, and minerals and all that. And it started to look like a really prosperous relationship. And I don't, the only threat I saw back then was really the military buildup. That where is this going to lead? But in general, the mood was that we are in this permanent state of detente, easing of tensions all over Europe. But yeah, and then the Ukraine mess started and everything changed. How close of an edge? Well, I've been thinking this a lot during the past few weeks, and there are certain steps that need still to be taken. Like, I don't think that NATO will go all the way defending Ukraine.
Hmm.
I don't think that is going to happen, because if Ukraine does something that really pushes Russia or Kremlin over the edge and they retaliate strongly, even maybe with a tactical nuclear weapon, any kind of like NATO response, especially with nuclear weapons, would basically lead to the MAD scenario, which is the mutual assured destruction. Mutual, well, whatever. Destruction of basically everything.
Mutually assured destruction, yes.
Yeah, mutually assured, yeah. So mutual assured, yes. So, So I don't think NATO would like go and end the world. What happens to if something really drastic happens to Ukraine? I don't think so. So there would be need basically how this to get to the edge or beyond the edge. I think we would need to see an attack from NATO country to Russia and Russian retaliation, or therefore some reason Russia attacking a NATO country directly. And then we would get into the path that really leads us over the edge. So that's my thinking, and I can be wrong, but I just don't think that NATO and the United States are willing to end the world while defending Ukraine. So I don't think we are, as a world, we are at the edge, but we are very close to it. That's for sure.
I truly hope that you're correct on this, because you are coming from a rational ground. You're standing on a rational ground, and you're saying what any sane person would say, and any, in my opinion, sane politician would say and would pursue for, and that is the escalation now in Ukraine. And what we saw in the past week, that the Ukrainians have struck early warning radars in Russia using Western weapons. And I was just checking what these radars do. Basically, they are just warning the defense systems and the air defense systems in Russia early on, so that they are more capable in stopping any sort of attacks against the Russian territory. And it really strikes me that this type of attacks is also meant against the nuclear deterrence of Russia. So here, what is the objective of Ukraine? Because in my opinion, Ukraine is not also a sane actor here. They have an invested interest, the Zelensky government, in escalating this conflict and bringing the NATO countries into the scene, because they're unable to win this war alone. So they have an invested interest in a direct clash between the NATO side and the Russian side. And this is very dangerous, in my opinion, don't you think?
Yeah, it is. It's actually, what I've read from the over the horizon radars is that they look to the height of several hundred kilometers to even several thousand kilometers, and very far, looking for signs of a launch of intercontinental ballistic missiles, and this kind of, and the middle range ballistic missiles. And so they have very little function for the war in Ukraine. And what is more, the second radar was it near Orsk, very far from Russia. It was 1,500 kilometers from Russia, the radar. It was not even looking at the direction of Ukraine. And in the Russian nuclear doctrine, I just read two studies explaining it. It has been updated in 2020. There is a clause that says that if you hit or seriously diminish the ability of Russian nuclear forces to operate, that is a probable cause for a first strike.
Yes.
So there's basically just two explanations why Ukraine would be doing this or hitting these radars. First one is that they desperately, like you mentioned, the Zelensky government desperately wants NATO to fully commit the war in Ukraine, which they hope will come after Russia is forced to, stop these attacks by maybe even a tactical nuclear strike. Ukraine. But I don't think that will happen. But that's the extreme escalation, and this is the scenario I think what the Zelensky government is looking for. The other, much more sinister, but also very speculative, would be that the US would have commenced these strikes to weaken the Russian early warning system. These are just the two plausible explanations, but this latter one is I would say it's very unlikely. But that's just, we have to recognize that also that possibility exists. But what I read now, basically after our warning, which came out was on Thursday, there has been, it seems, quite heavy discussions behind the scenes between US officials and Ukrainian officials that you absolutely do not do these strikes anymore. You do not continue these strikes. That's my reading. But we of course we don't know for sure. But so yeah, but the point is that I think what we should draw from this is that Ukraine, the Zelensky government is getting really desperate, and it can do desperate things. Just like today, I read that they had used the U.S. What was the missile type? I forgot. But anyway, U.S. provided missiles to hit some targets deep in Russia, which is something that and which was something that the Biden administration did not approve. They said that you can strike around the Kharkiv region, but not in that area. So we have a risk that the Ukraine they have a rogue government which will do anything to ignite the regional war in Europe. So yeah, the lengthy explanation, but
I've been following the Ukraine case since 2014, and I didn't know much about Ukraine. But a professor of mine in Beirut back then told me if World War III would erupt, it is going to happen in Ukraine, and this was in 2014 when the coup happened. And I was very interested to learn more about Ukraine. And now in 2022, and of course before that, I visited the front lines in Donetsk in 2015 to see what's happening there. And what happened, in my opinion, in 2022, the provocation of the NATO countries were deliberate, and they wanted for the Russians to invade Ukraine. This is in my understanding. I can be wrong, because they thought that once the Russians invade Ukraine, it will become a quagmire for them, the Afghanistan 2.0, and they will drain and crush the Russian economy and the ruble. They will turn it into rubble, etc., because they have a dominance over the financial institutions, the SWIFT, the sanction regime, etc., etc. And the type of weapons that they supplied to Ukraine, they thought they will deter the Russians. So they told Zelensky not to sign a peace treaty. This was in early 2022. And Zelensky went along the Americans and the Brits. But this was the illusion, right, in 2022. Now we're in mid-2024. Even the American officials, they know that Ukraine cannot win this war. They know that pushing the Russian forces out of Ukraine has become a mission impossible for them. However, they still support Ukraine with military equipment, ammunition, and although Ukraine lacks the manpower and also cannot compete Russia's ability to manufacture armaments or repair the damaged armed equipments, right? So if the end result is a quagmire at best and a defeat for Ukraine at worst, then what is the grand strategy of the United States here? Continuing the war in this senseless way, it doesn't look like, for me, a strategy. They don't have an end game, a point where they can say, now let's sit on a table to negotiate. We achieved something here. What is the goal of the Americans now?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I've been pondering that a lot. And I don't think this is just the Americans. It's Europeans too. If you look at, for example, what von der Leyen has said and all that. But the problem or the issue is that I at least find it hard to find a proper explanation for these atrocities to continue. Like, I think there's maybe three plausible, aims or scenarios you can sketch here. The first one is that this was my original thinking in late, or let's say mid 2022, that the Eurasian alliance had become a threat to the US hegemony in the world. And it was actually one of the most influential political scholars, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who already in 1997 formulated the strategy that the US should dominate the global scheme or global realm through Eurasia.
Yes.
And the idea that Eurasian alliance was forming, it was becoming too big of a threat to US, could have been one reason why they needed the war in Ukraine. And why it continues is that because you cannot, if you stop it, Russia and Europe will make peace and everything will return to normal or the way it was. So this is one plausible explanation. I think the second one is that, well, and there's always that war, it's difficult to get wars ending when you start. It's just there's something in their nature. They just tend to keep going. But then there is this that economy is about to collapse, and they want the war to cover it. And this would not be the first time in history that this happens. But it's getting this is a rather macabre explanation already. But it's one we need to consider. And then there's a third one, which is again very speculative, but which is something I've been forced to ponder, let's say, for the past 8 months, that there is some powerful group somewhere in the world behind the scenes, which for some very dark reason wants this war. So, and if we look at how systematic this is, how this is pushed everywhere, like it's not the US and not just Finland, it's France and Poland and Estonia and all that. So why are they talking? Where is the peace movement, for example?
Yes.
Where are the leaders who would be pushing for peace? Like, and all European history, if it says one thing, it says do not go to war. That's a one. If there's one lesson in all European history, that's it. Do not make war. It doesn't yield anything good. And yet it's missing the whole peace movement. So if we factor in this, and the fact that if there's a systemic thing, these are not just stupid voices talking the same thing all over Europe. This is a systematic thing. And if something is systematic, in statistics, it implies there's a structure which is unseen in the analysis. And you mistakenly think it's an error. But when it's systematic, it's not. There's structure. So now we need to ask, what is the structure behind all this that is pushing the war? And it's for me, it looks that it's something invisible. We cannot observe it, but it's there.
Yes.
So I've been looking at a long macroeconomic time series for 20 years. And it's and I specialize in stochastic time series, which there is some trend that pushes the time series around. There is a feeling of something similar. There's something behind we cannot observe for some reason. But the systematic progress of things, or everything that is said, and the very deliberate escalation and crossing of Russian red lines hints that there is a structure pushing for this conflict into a wider war. And that is extremely troublesome conclusion. But I'm having difficulties finding any other plausible explanation anymore. And and then we really need to ask, what is this structure? What is it doing, and who's in it?
I think this was, to be honest with you, this was the most brilliant explanation and theories that I have heard since the 2022, and it's very comprehensive and it gives too many factors. And the last factor that you mentioned, it's very important in my opinion. And I would like to ask you this because I watched the interview of Jeffrey Sachs with Tucker Carlson the other day, and Tucker was pressing a lot to know why the endless wars, like why the CIA is engaged in all these covert operations and military invasions and interventions all the time. It's like they're not finished with one conflict and another conflict starts in somewhere else. And one of the answers of Jeffrey Sachs was, maybe from the perspective of the planners in Washington, D.C., that this is beneficial for them. They don't, their goal is not decisive victory, I'm paraphrasing him, in certain conflicts, but probably the goal is to make profits, is to recycle the money that they're sending to these war zones and the armaments that they are selling. I mean, Afghanistan was one of the biggest, let's say, the money laundering operation in the recent history. How many $1 trillion? We know that.
Yeah,
and,
a lot.
A lot. And I remember when Julian Assange was asked, he said the purpose of the Afghanistan war is not to win this war. It's an endless war to recycle money. And I see that something similar is happening in Ukraine, because these manufacturers, the arm manufacturers, the military-industrial complex, the last budget that they have dedicated to send equipment and the military aid, the security package to Ukraine, the most of it's coming back to their pockets because they are replacing the equipment that they have sent already to Ukraine. So there may be some people in the United States see like, oh, this is a good game for us. We're making profits, but on the expense of the Ukrainian people. 500,000 Ukrainian men have perished. 500,000 Syrian men have perished in my country with this senseless regime change war of the United States. In Iraq, 1 million people. In Libya, how many tens of thousands of people? So it seems to me that we, as just an ordinary people, we are a cannon fodders in this grand scheme of a geopolitical struggle. But at the same time, you have people with private invested financial interest in keeping these wars continue, right?
Yeah. I think what Jeffrey was referring to was the kind of long time standing notion that CIA does not, many times does not really follow what the White House is saying. So it's a kind of state within the state. This has been known for quite some time. Yes. And, its existence requires a threat, a crisis. When the Soviet Union collapsed, there was no proper counterparty. KGB was gone. Well, not completely gone, but seriously defunded and all that. So I think Jeffrey was first and foremost referring to this. And this, I'm sure that this plays all in Ukraine too. I just, where has the money gone? Basically, that has been sent to Ukraine. I don't think it's gone to, war effort. Well, some of it has gone to the war efforts, but how much has gone into corruption? And yeah, I think this definitely plays a role, and we know that CIA had its hands there in the Euromide and all this. But I'm just thinking this is too big for just a central intelligence agency to run. So you need some kind of umbrella organization or something that is pushing this. And that's what I'm referring to as the systematic thing, yes. The structure.
I totally agree with you on this. And there is the China factor in this conversation. The Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, Richard Marles, He claimed that China is laboring under a false impression that there is an indelible hostility towards it from the West, when all the world wants is for the emerging giant to prosper lawfully and peacefully. Um, so, according to the Prime Minister of, or the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, China is being paranoid, and it's coming for to assist Russia in Ukraine because China thinks that when the collective West is finished with Russia, then they will focus all their energy on China. Is China wrong in assisting Russia in this conflict, or the statement of the Deputy Prime Minister is being a little bit naive here?
Well, if you think strategically, so who would China trust more? You know, the U.S., which has been known to, uh, let's say, abandon allies, and which they have like a very uneasy economic relationship with, or then Russia, who provides cheap energy and is there in the need of an assistance. And I don't think China really. I don't think they wanted. I don't think Beijing wanted to have to choose a side. But now Ukraine conflict has pushed it to choose a side, and it naturally takes on Russia's side, and Taiwan also relates to that. I never been in Taiwan or China for that matter, but when you read the China analysts on how they see Taiwan and the one China policy and all that, there is a quite clear indication that U.S. has been deliberately, again, maybe CIA has, or what some faction in the U.S. has deliberately been stepping over the kind of the red lines of Beijing again, in a way that they have been talking about independence while China was been talking about mutual coexistence and all that. And of course, we have to remember that China is a country ruled by a single party, and Russia is effectively also a country run by a single party. So there is also this kind of let's say more authoritarian structure of not controlling, but anyway, to how to rule the country. So there are many kind of aspects which, from purely strategical point of view, push China towards Russia. So this alliance was obvious when things got going this way. So, and I think it's this is once again a very unpleasant thought. But if you want a world war, you prefer just two sides.
Yes.
And we got them now.
But the intention here is very important. Like from the Chinese point of view, that the intention is bad, let's say, to put it in simple terms, from the Western side. Like because the rhetoric coming from the neocons in the United States, that they want to have absolute dominance over the world. They want to defeat Russia, isolate and pivot to the east and isolate China. They are holding now these military drills in the Philippines. They have forces in South Korea, in Japan. They want to block the Chinese free access, let's say, to the international waters. I mean, from geopolitical perspective, I understand why they're doing that. But they always speak about, like, we're here to defend the democracy of Taiwan. We're here for the good reason, It's like, it bothers me. It bothers me because this has become really a cliche. I mean, after 2003, after the invasion of Iraq, nobody believes that the United States is spreading democracy around the world. So that's why serious politicians is important to have serious politicians, whether they're authoritarian or not. Because in China, we can argue that it's a centralized authoritarian government. In Russia, it's the same. But they're rational actors, and they don't want to continue in this war. They want to cooperate with the West because their economic models is different. from the United States. It's in their interest to have a peaceful relationship and sell their gas and their products to the rest of the world. This is how I don't know why this argument becomes so controversial recently. Oh, you're a Putinist, you're spreading Putin talking points. I'm like, I'm checking the attitude of Russia, and I was like, the Americans have to thank God that it's Putin in power and not, for example, Medvedev or someone like crazy, like hot-headed someone. It's like this man is really holding his strengths, like he's trying to. He told them in 2008 in the Munich Security Conference, just stop it. This is the limit. Stop it. Don't expand to Ukraine. I'm like, we're going to expand to Ukraine, and it's going to become a NATO country. Stoltenberg says, Blinken says, everybody says at the end, it's not going to happen. Like, without nuclear war, Ukraine is not going to become a NATO member. And unfortunately, this illusion is also not only in this Western world, but also in Zelensky. I would like to show you a video of Zelensky. He has made a statement about China and Russia in this regard. Let's take a look together.
Underscore it yet again, because for you to understand that for us it is very painful and a bit strange. Unfortunately, regrettably, Russia, using Chinese influence on the region, using Chinese diplomats also, does everything to disrupt peace summit. Regrettably, it is unfortunate that such big, independent, powerful country as China is an instrument in the hands of Putin.
So China is an instrument in the hands of Putin.
Right. No, I don't know. The peace conference. Let's say that after the Second World War, there would have been a peace conference of the remaining, let's say, figures of Nazi Germany, saying that no, we need to have a peace conference on our terms. That would not have happened. So what China, at least what I've read, China is saying that you need to acknowledge what has happened on the ground in Ukraine.
Yes.
Russia has basically won the war. So it comes from their terms now. Before, like in 2022, in March, April, they have the kind of the balance of negotiations was very more like balanced. But now it's the other way around. So it's just the whole Swiss like peace conference, just a show. Basically, I think, at least so it looks to me, it's just a show for the Westerners, and no, we are actually doing something. And then with the other hand, they are escalating all the time. So it's a show, nothing else. And China knows it. And at last I checked, Joe Biden isn't going there. So what's the point?
Yes.
So it's all kind of a show that has been presented for us in the West for over 2 years. And this is something we haven't really understood. It took me 6 years to understand, 6 months to understand. But we have been under war propaganda since February 2022. That's a fact. If I look at the Finnish news, I think Putin should have died like 37 times, and his regime is collapsing every other month. And still people read this. Like, I know what has happened. Like, has all intelligence, gone away from Finnish people? It's a ridiculous thing. I just hope that I would have started to take, pictures of these headlines, and it would make a perfect story of how many times Putin should have died and how many times Russia should have collapsed and all that. They repeat the same thing. It's a propaganda. And it's massive in the social media, like the NAFO fellas and all that. Yes. These are like the Russian propaganda is mostly aimed at Russians, which is rather understandable. But we are getting this all kinds of crazy propaganda tools all over, and their funding is much, much bigger than what Russians are able to master. So, and I'm thinking that, like the NAFO fellas and all that, I think in X, if they are not funded by some, sub corporation of CIA or something like that, I don't know, eat my hat or something. Yeah, it's of course it is. There are funding, and this is a propaganda war also. But people, we haven't used to that, or very few of us alive don't know what propaganda is, war propaganda. So we're just idiots, or chickens led to the slaughter, lambs led to the slaughter, something like that. It's not good.
Dr. Tuomas, this propaganda that you mentioned is very, very essential and instrumental in this conflict in Ukraine. That when the regime change war started in Syria, I was still very young, but I documented a lot in Syria. This is where my work started, and I can assure you that with 100% confidence that there were lies and propaganda about Russia, that Putin died, his cook has poisoned him, and he escaped to St. Petersburg, etc., etc. The exact same things they said about Syria. They just changed Syria with Russia and Assad with Putin. The same, exact same. So if you followed what they did in Syria, it's complete the same recycling of the same propaganda tactics in Russia. The problem is that they're not creative in this propaganda, but they're powerful. They're very powerful. However, it's very easy to debunk these narratives and these false narratives. That's why Ursula von der Leyen comes and says, this debunking thing is not working. We're not able to debunk you. Now we have to pre-bunk you. Which means before we even think about something, she wants to pre-bank us. Before we even post something on social media platforms, she wants to pre-bank us. This shows that the war of the narratives is not really playing in favor of these politicians who are pushing for this war between Russia and NATO. And that's why the suppression comes, and they change the algorithms. They do all sorts of things to manipulate the people's opinions. And unfortunately, because look, I moved to Germany in 2015. I had no idea about Europe, how the people live. But now, because I live here for like 9 years now, people really don't have time to double check, verify information. They are very busy with their work. They wake up very early and they go to their work and come back late, and the transportation and the kids. It's really hard, for any ordinary European to sit in front of the internet and double check information. If I turn on the mainstream media in Germany, now I feel insulted. I feel like they are insulting my intelligence because they're speaking to people that they are targeting them and trying to propagandize them. They're trying to really brainwash the people, and it's really not the job of the press. And I will show you, this is the last thing. I just want to show you what I was reading today. This is from the Telegraph. And of course, this woman, she works for the Institute for the Study of Wars. And I think Victoria Nuland, she has hands in this institute. She says, if Putin wins, expect the worst genocide since the Holocaust. Sexual violence, ethnic cleansing, and mass executions are all part of the Russian playbook. We must wake up to what its victory would mean. And this is what you just mentioned about propaganda. They're completely detached from the reality and creating a parallel universe in their minds and trying to convince the people that if the Ukrainians don't win this war, then this is what's going to happen. And they don't define what victory for Ukraine is. Ask any politician. I watched the interviews of the foreign minister of Germany, foreign minister of France, and they all speak about the victory of Ukraine, but none of them defines what victory for Ukraine is about. Because victory for Ukraine, according to the Ukrainians, all the Russian forces out of Ukraine, and that means also, of course, Crimea. And in my opinion, the Russians will never tolerate losing the Black Sea. They went into so many wars historically, and they came to in support of Syria to keep their also fleet in the Mediterranean, because they want to have in the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. So they will do all they can. I just see really dangerous, unprecedented propaganda, as you mentioned, and it's very dangerous that these journalists are doing the bidding of these powerful people. Guys, we are around 850 people now watching this live streaming on YouTube, Rumble, and X. I really appreciate you all, guys. It goes without saying. Yes, I will give you the comment now. It goes without saying that the X account of Dr. Tuomas is in the description below. His Substack is in the description below, and his journal, the GNS, is also economics, is also in the description below, so you can follow and receive the newsletters. Go ahead, Dr. Tuomas.
Yeah. So I didn't read that article fully, but did she refer to a genocide or Holocaust in Ukraine or Europe in general? Was it in Ukraine?
No, in Europe.
Right. So let me get this straight. So Russian men who come here, to Italy for holiday would suddenly come here and, rape everybody and then burn them in ovens. Right. This is basically the Holocaust.
Yes.
This is like so preposterous that this should wake people up. This makes absolutely no sense. It's the same demonization that, for example, first the Nazis used in the Second World War of the Jews, and then when the Operation Barbarossa started, and German troops went very far, very deep into Russia. They had these, I forgot the name of the troops, but they were these troops that actually went on and raped and murdered. Mm-hmm. That's what. And when Russians came back, well, it was a retaliation time, let's say. So it was a very brutal phase on that retrospect. But we would see something like that in like modern Europe, with all nations basically knowing each other. No, absolutely not. It's just so stupid that I cannot. But it just shows how low the mainstream media has sunk, and for whom they're doing the bidding.
Yes.
Again, there is this structure, which most likely there is a structure here which we don't understand or know what it is. But it's what driving all these crazy things. And I want to mention another thing which we talked about earlier on how President Putin and President Xi Jinping, for example, conduct foreign policy. Like, foreign policy, geopolitics has been on my life since very early age. And I like, what I really respected was, let's say back in the 1980s, when I started to first understand things, was how Gorbachev and Reagan, how they kind of navigated through, and how there was clear lines that we go this way, we go that way, and there were like clear strategical aims of both parties which were easy to follow.
Yes. Currently,
we're in a situation when you listen to what President Putin says, you think what Kremlin wants. It's okay, they want this. This is basically what I want. And the same applies to China, but the message is has always been more hidden. Then when you turn into NATO and European leaders, insanity. It doesn't make any freaking sense. What they don't seem to want the war, but it's chaos. So what comes of, like, let's say statesman leadership, I trust more on President Putin and Xi Jinping than any of these like Western leaders. And to be honest, like we know for sure that Joe Biden is not on the helm anymore. So who is? And these are serious questions, because it's completely clear that he has some neurological disease or something like that. And it's the second largest nuclear power in the world. So a whole Western like hegemony or security structure, whatever we have been building, is crumbling currently at the massive pace. And they are just pointing us to look at the Russian bear, and our own house is burning. So this is how you do it. Like, you create a threat that you don't notice what's happening right beneath you, or where you live or where you are. So these are these really strange developments going on, which people should really wake up to.
Dr. Tuomas, what a brilliant conversation with you today, really. I really appreciate your time and coming to the show, and I would really love to have you again in the near future to continue this discussion, because it's very important to create, to build bridges. I live in Berlin, and I'm not a German, but I do really try to tell my German friends what's happening in Ukraine, with Russia, in Syria, and it's difficult task, right? That's why we have podcasts like this spreading the word around the world. So thank you so much, really. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, and we definitely do this again.
In Arabic, we say inshallah. We will definitely do it in the near future. And yes. And guys, I really appreciate you all, really. Like, we are now around 1,000 people watching this live streaming on 3 platforms. I appreciate you all. If you like to support this work, just hit the like button before you leave this, so that more people can see it, because we have to navigate through the algorithm and the suppression of these social media platforms. And if you like to support the independent work that I'm doing, you can become a patron. The link is scrolling on the screen. Patreon.com/Syriana Analysis. Peace be upon you, upon your families. Ciao.